Can't believe this Friday came so quickly again. I think I say that every week, don't I?
Yeah, it seems as we get more mature, both in our professions and in our age, time goes by quicker and quicker.
We should do a show on that. Why does time go? When I was a kid, summers lasted forever. Now, when I'm an adult and a grandfather, summers don't last quite as long. But yeah, that's. Hey, I like the premise that you presented for this podcast, with it being the fact that we as project managers are not isolated from sort of the influences that the businesses that we support are influenced by. So I thought that's great. And I have I think a great story to start off with. I've used this before in past podcasts. I think I've even used it in a couple of my write-ups. But several years ago, we had worked on a project. We were doing advisory services and oversight for a government department. And part of what we were doing was we were bringing in the Medicaid program as it was in sort of enacted in legislation at that point. Now, somewhere in the back of our minds, we had this inkling that something called, which is now affectionately known as Obamacare. This is in the U.S. for our non-U.S. participants. Something called Obamacare, which was, what's that? The
Affordable Care Act.
Affordable
AC.
Care Act. Yeah, exactly. The affordable. Well, we knew it was out there, but we were knee deep. We were already halfway or almost all the way through our requirements definition when the Affordable Care Act was legislated and it was enacted, and we suddenly had to turn on our heels and redo not all of our requirements, but the major eligibility pieces of our requirements, redo the requirements, and then begin the design with these new requirements. So I think this fits perfectly with what we're talking about in terms of there are influences that hit our businesses or the organizations that we are supporting, that we need to be ready to support them, our businesses, in being able to handle these kinds of things.
Oh, indeed, indeed. The project body, management body of knowledge talks about this, and they say that projects are all about change, and projects are a business or a corporation's response to the change ongoing around them. So I thought, this would be a good kickoff to season 3, especially due to the fact that we're going through massive change in all sorts of facets of society. And the question we have, and the question I pose to my students is, how do we as project managers prepare ourselves, not just who we are as employees, but supporting our teams, helping our teams prepare, and helping our projects become resilient with all of this confusion going on?
Well, and let me back that up even a little further, because when I was introduced to this career called project management, remember, I was a programmer, and then I was introduced to this career called project management. In many ways, we were still order takers. And I use that term affectionately, but also with a little disdain. We just kind of took orders from the people above us, and they just said, do this. But I think where you're coming from, as I understand what you just said, is that we need to be full partners with our business management so that we can help them make decisions on how we should move forward because of some external influence or some external disruption.
Exactly. How can I, as a project manager, be the proper advisor for the decision maker on my projects so they can get either what they want or better, despite what's going around them?
Yeah. Well, think about this, just even the last little while, and just even in terms of your experience. So what are some of the major kind of disruptions that you're aware of that happened to you during, or to your customer during your career?
Do we want to go into ancient history?
No, let's just go back to say 1999, almost.
Oh, okay. So that's easy.
Yeah.
1997 was the year that the state government, I was an IT director, said that if you are holding personal data for the people you have, you're going to have to retrofit all of your systems that you don't use the Social Security number as a primary identifier. That was a mind blower.
Yeah.
How are we going? We had over 9 million records in one of our databases. And how are we going to pull that off within the time that the state required? Another good one.
Actually, let me go back to that one, because I projects that I was working on had the similar situation with that identifier. And what really caught us off guard was we didn't know every place it had been used. And suddenly we remembered all of the external correspondence that went to the customers of our departments had those identifiers. So we had to make sure that those were all redacted from every piece of correspondence that went out. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but yeah.
Oh, no. This is great. You and I are actually showing similar experiences through the external environment's demand for change.
Yeah.
Another good one was the year 2000. We didn't know if using a 2-digit identifier for years was going to blow up systems or cause airplanes to crash or what. And so we were literally, and every corporation on the planet that was aware of this was literally going through code. Do you remember how much a COBOL programmer in 1997 to 1999 could command? It was atrocious.
Well, and not only that, I mean, I remember up to $60 an hour in some cases, and that was huge for back then. But not only that, is our project secretary decided she was going to become a COBOL programmer. Now, she took some COBOL courses and went from making $13,000 a year to $60 an hour. How do you like that?
Yeah, it's amazing. It really is. And then let's continue progressing through the time. Let's see here: 2001, 2007, 2008, 2011. Okay, here. No, it was 9/11.
9/11. Oh, yeah.
Which year was that? I forget which year that was.
2001.
2001. That's right. I had 2 major projects in the basement of one of the World Trade Centers, and we had 5 engineers on site. Luckily, both the companies were taking a holiday that day, and my engineers were going out as a group, and they were they were sightseeing. So they were outside of Manhattan, but we weren't able, after the World Trade Center went down, we weren't even able to communicate with them for over a week. That was a huge aha. And then on top of that, the hardening of all the physical facilities on the planet the corporation went through. We knew once the corporation was making these decisions, this was really serious. So we had to internalize that serious nature and say, what did we have to do to protect our people and our projects with this as the new reality?
I remember that well. I was in a tower in the middle of downtown Detroit, and all of our project team had been living in, at that point, I think it was the GM building. It was a very tall building right on the river.
Mm-hmm.
And people thought, well, if they went after the World Trade Center, is the GM building next? Is the Sears building in Chicago next? And so suddenly we had to disrupt our entire project, move everyone inland to the capital city to be able to make sure that we could continue. And immediately we had to start making changes to a lot of our processes. So yeah, these external influences absolutely make a difference to what we're doing. And we as project managers better be on the side of helping our customers make good decisions.
Yeah, and now look at us now in the last 5 years with the whole disruption of major diseases, just making a sweep after sweep. Every week there's an update internationally or nationally on diseases that are racking the planet. And it's funny because if you go back into history beyond like 75 years ago, This is the way it's always been.
Yeah.
We're not in a new way things are now. We're in the way it's always been. We've been actually complacent, and we've been lucky for the last 50 years.
The difference, of course, is with the acceleration of IT processes, pretty much running everything that we do in society. That wasn't necessarily as it certainly wasn't as prevalent back 75 years ago. And so therefore the change that gets affected as a result of these things. What's interesting to me is we were able to recover, and recover is probably a poor word, but we were able to recover quickly with the COVID pandemic from an IT perspective. But we weren't able to recover from the supply chains, the things that helped us keep our projects moving. So the IT part, we were able to put in the cloud, send people home, get everybody on Zoom or Teams or WebEx. We're able to do that quickly, but some of the other things that we needed weren't as easily obtainable because of the other disruptions.
Yeah, I was surprised at how resilient communication is. I was really surprised at that. I was not surprised at how unresilient supply chain is. That was a shocker. And I think that we still have a lot of lessons learned to capture from this. There's ongoing conversation, but let's actually close this out. Let's talk about other things that have been happening that actually are and continue to be the disruptors that we work with on a daily basis. So from a technology standpoint, what do you see?
Well, we've talked about it at length here, and I think it's a topic that's not going away, but the whole artificial intelligence, to make sure that we can use that responsibly and not for mankind's detriment. But if we use it responsibly, we can, here's how I equate it. When I was in college, I used to have to go to the school library and use a card catalog. When I started using Google or Bing or some of those inside the search engines, it was like a revolution from card catalog to Google search or Bing search. Now we're going from Google and Bing searching to the AI, where it's actually doing some of the work for you. And again, if we learn to use that responsibly, that will be a huge impetus to what it is that we do as project managers.
Yes. I tend to think of it at this point. I see it as an evolutionary step instead of revolutionary, because I've been watching the advancement of AI since the 1970s. I see it as assisted AI right now. We're still asking the questions, and we're still actually applying the context and the analysis. It's like what I was talking to a bunch of peers this morning about. It's AI is really strange because it can read the top of the water and it can tell you the waves, but you need to be a really experienced sailor to understand what those waves are saying.
Yeah.
And so as project managers, this is something we have to realize, whether we're getting knowledge and analysis from people or systems, we still have a vital role in analysis and giving advice.
And maybe even more so, because quite frankly, some of the reporting you get from some of the artificial intelligence engines looks pretty incredible. It looks like you're reading an encyclopedia transcript of something that may not in fact be true.
Exactly. So that's from a technology standpoint.
Yeah.
What's happening from a non-technology standpoint that you see that's going on?
Well, I think that I'd like to explore this at some point, but this whole idea of mass resignations and quiet quitting, if our customer organizations don't sort of nip this in the bud and offer really solid career experiences to staff, there will be a huge talent staff shortage. And what's going to happen, that translates into how we then affect the projects that we're working on, because the talent isn't there for us to work with. So I see that the whole talent thing as being a
Oh yeah. I remember Java when Java was becoming top of mind in object-oriented programming and web development. And everybody in our organization ran to Java. And for like 6 months, we had a deficit of people who actually worked with HTML and the other tools that you use for web development. Project Management Institute calls this demographic shifts. And the problem is these things are happening so much quicker because we have so much access to information. Look at how quickly we saw AI emerge and everybody embrace it. This has never been this quick. And you can imagine everybody, just like your admin friend, rushing off to say, I'm going to have a new job. And it's like, I don't know if this is sustainable. We're going to have to work from a project standpoint. This can't be, but we have to figure out how are we going to actually manage our work in such a way that these external influences don't actually upset our project boat.
Well, and using your Java, that example, I was in a project where part of what we did as the PMO, what we're responsible for, was knowledge transfer. So we had put out the request for proposal. We got in a large company helping us put together a product, but the product was with the new internet services, with with Java and some of those things. But what happened was the staff of the organization we're working for, the IT staff, who were supposed to have knowledge transferred to them to be able to maintain the systems in an M&O perspective, maintenance and operations, were very comfortable with COBOL and assembler and the old languages, and they refused. So what do? You can't be, the organization we're with couldn't fire them. So, we had to figure out ways, and that's something completely unexpected because of the kind of the technology / non-technology effect of that situation.
You have a dilemma.
Yeah.
On one side, you have the technology, which is easy to adopt and quick to transfer. You have the human behavior and culture that says, hold on a minute now. That's just silly. And this dilemma doesn't go away, even though our tools get better and faster and more accurate. We have to get our hands around understanding the behavioral aspects of this technology transformation, and also these other non-technology disruptions that are going on around us.
Which is why, in my mind, season 3 that we're doing with the podcast is going to be so important, because we are going away from the process and the technology more to the human behavioral aspects. So that's going to be exciting, I think, for this whole season.
Yes. Now, there's one phrase that I want to spend time with you on, and we'll talk about this moving forward. There's something called status quo. How do you interpret status quo, Merv?
Comfort. I love status quo because I know it's to be expected of me. I know that when I get up in the morning and do my work and go home at night, it's all there. It's all comfortable. It's all predictable. That's very comforting for a human being. That's how I interpret status quo.
Not only that, but if you've spent time inside of manufacturing, status quo is the brass ring. You're going around on a merry-go-round and you're trying to capture that every single day. And disruption of status quo was anathema. That's a disaster. You're going to have to shut down operations. You're going to have to bring in QA. You're going to have to do all sorts of analysis before you can actually have predictability on your processes. So status quo and the stability is a necessity a lot of times in business. And we're talking about now challenging status quo with emerging technology, or being able to minimize disruption as we bring in these new technologies, or we rebound from these events that are going on.
Well, exactly. And they're happening quicker. when I was a COBOL programmer, had I not gone up the analysis project management career path, I could have stayed a COBOL programmer for probably 10, 15 more years easily. And maybe even into the Y2K and made some extra money. But now it's like, Java is not even that necessarily that used anymore. They've gone on to other sorts of programming languages and drag and drop and all the sorts of things that bring on efficiencies for programming staff. So if you look at that, things are happening much quicker. And so the status quo is challenged, not every 15 years, but every year at this point.
Now, you just said something really interesting. You talked about emerging from COBOL to a better job and a better position and better pay, right? Now, This is really interesting. Does that mean disruption has an opportunity as well as a threat?
Oh, I think from a project management point of view, I'd like to hear your thoughts on this as well. But I think from a project management point of view, if you don't roll with the punches when something like that hits, I think you're not showing your creativity, your capability to do other things. I kind of liken it to, programming. I could have stayed a COBOL programmer for 15 years. As a project manager, without kind of participating in changes to the status quo, I can still stay as a good process-oriented or technical project manager, but I will never be that strategic project manager that customers are looking for.
Yes, that's the key. There's risk involved. There's a lot of risk involved, but I've actually observed that these disruption points, like we have to get away from Social Security numbers as a primary key in our databases, or we need to go to another platform to develop our business intelligence, right? I see these not just as a holdback, not just as a disruption to status quo, but I also see them as opportunities. And this is where I was able to leapfrog over a lot of my peers because I was, ready to actually say, what if? It wasn't as if I was going to do it automatically, but for something drove me to actually say, there is another path here. We need to explore it. We may never change what we do here in our organization, but you know what? What if? What does it look like? What does success look like at the end? And that curiosity carried me forward.
Well, yeah, I think I was exactly the same here. I do want to go back, though. I didn't mean to suggest, nor am I suggesting, that a person who decided to stay a programmer for their entire career is doing themselves a disfavor. There are people who are, quite frankly, we've built a couple of houses. There are people who have been framers for 30 years. That's what they like to do, framing. They didn't want to ever become a superintendent of building services, right? So there are those people who don't want to challenge the status quo, who want to stay, and that's fine. But for me and for you, we wanted to do it because we are those inquisitive people who are unhappy if things don't change within a year or so.
Well, and think about the role of a project manager. If I don't ask what if, one of my stakeholders is going to. And at that point, I'm going to have to reactively analyze this and give a solid response. And it's better if I ask what if. And if the decisions from consensus lead us to the path of pursuing an opportunity, I am going to support that. So from a role as a project manager standpoint, it's critical that we have these analytical skills that say we may not be going down this path, but we really do need to. Now, there are other disruptions like lockdown from federal government, right? That say, this is the path we're going, authority has spoken, this is the way you're going. But there's a lot of potential in what if, not just from lessons learned, but also from from actually capturing, potential opportunities that you can expose, not just minimizing threats. This is where risk management can be a huge benefit to not just the project, but the organization.
Oh, huge. I remember being called in by a government organization one time for a small, I forget what it was. It was a very small contract to help them put together some thought processes around how they were doing IT. And as a result of that, I got to know the senior project manager, what we would call a CIO. We got to know them fairly well. And then I went away and went back to my old project. Well, wouldn't you know it, but a year later, they put out an RFP. This organization I had consulted with had put out an RFP, and I was able to bid on it with my partner, and we won the RFP. Were there things in the RFP that I could have responded to because of my previous contract? No, I couldn't have bid had that happened. But was there something in our response that helped us understand our client better, our future client better, and them understand us better? Absolutely. And so what you were just saying is exactly what we're looking for, is to be able to go in and help and be that strategic help to our clients. And as a result of that, in this case, it ended up being a very lucrative contract that came out of that. So
yeah. One of my consulting mentors called that trusted advisor.
There you go. There you go. Exactly.
Again, we're talking about brass rings here that you're grabbing on. This is the position every entrepreneur wants to be. And a consultant or consulting project manager. This is the role that actually doesn't give you contracts, but actually gives you managed services agreements. So you can build those deep, trusting relationships that can actually, maintain your cash flow.
Yeah. And that's what we're looking for, right? If we're those inquisitive creatives, we want that next challenge. And who was it told me? He says that what you need to be able to do is do your best even when no one is looking. And so when you do your best even when no one is looking, somehow, somewhere it comes to the surface. In the example I just gave, small consulting agreement, they realized, as you said, that I could be a trusted advisor. I may have had an advantage, I may not have, but I think our response proved not only was my previous experience good, but the next one would also be good. So yeah, what you're saying is exactly correct. Grab that brass ring and run with it.
So here we go. What are the PM skills we need to be able to be flexible enough to respond to these events, both from responding to threats, but also analyzing and potentially responding in order to maximize opportunities? What do we need as project managers?
So the first response would be, well, I need to be able to do a proper Gantt chart and resource it properly. And that is important. But equally important is the ability to read what's happening around us in the world that we are in. So things like legal and regulatory compliance and knowledge of what's going to happen. My opening gambit with the Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act, we felt it was coming. We were somewhat expecting it to come. We had prepared for it as much as we could, and so didn't catch us by complete surprise. But had we not read the tea leaves and understood regulatory and legal compliance, we would not have been as prepared as we were. So I'd like to hear some of your thoughts.
Well, I'm going to take it from a behavioral standpoint too, and maybe this will actually trigger some things. You're right. From a technical standpoint, we have to have all the change management skills in place. What's the risk? What's the impact to quality? What's the impact to the other constraints? There's a behavioral point. I have to be pretty self-aware And I have to say, okay, I've been through a lot of these major events before. How do I respond? Do I shoot from the hip, the back of my brain here? Do I use my survival mechanism to approach these things? Do I bark at people? Do I push and make things happen? Or do I actually cultivate and manage my analytical skills where I, like you said, I gather the appropriate data, I apply the proper analysis for the problem I'm trying to decide, and then I look at the results. And I, as an individual, don't do this. This is something that we do as a group. We cannot do this as superstars. Project managers are not good superstars on projects.
Yeah, exactly. In fact, if we're doing it right, if we're doing our job correctly, sometimes we become the naysayers on the project. I'll give you a perfect example. Several years ago, we were working on a project and we were getting near that end, right? We're finishing user acceptance testing, getting the implementation processes, the training processes all aligned for a go live. And the CIO took us out for lunch, all of his, advisors. And he says, do we go? Yes. Do we go? Yes. Do we go? Yes. They got to me, says, do we go? No. You should have seen the look on his face and the other advisors' faces when I said no. So of course he wanted to know why. And I had a data-driven approach to that, but also, as you were just saying, an approach based on experience, having lived through these sorts of implementations before. So I was able to very quickly and very emphatically help him understand why we needed to delay the implementation. I was not popular, but
yeah, and exactly right. Now, this actually mirrors something that I learned with my project teams. I had two people that came onto my projects on a regular basis, and they were both what I called canaries in a cage. They'd be the holdouts, and they'd be the ones saying, wait, have you considered this? Have you considered this? And it actually dawned on me too slowly. I should have picked this up earlier. But a lot of the team members would say, not again. Come on. We understand this. And the guy would just sit there smiling and would actually hold his ground until I met him on a regular basis when we were traveling. We had like a 7-week project together up in Oregon. I learned that he was actually, in an altruistic manner, attempting to do us a service. And once I understood how he perceived his role, I was able to take advantage of that. And then I was able to actually work with him in a positive manner to capture what he was saying, bring it to the team in a logical manner without the team responding emotionally. So we could have that alternatives analysis and have that calm, thoughtful decision-making that we need sometimes.
But here's what's interesting about that particular vignette is that we as project managers, if all we do is stick to the technical and process-oriented skills, we don't enhance our ability to read the room, and in your case, be able to judge the situation as a result of doing some analysis of the human behavioral aspects.
So much of our work is reading people, not just reading code or reading context diagrams or schedules. So much. And it's not just self-awareness is not understanding other people, and emotional intelligence is not understanding the emotions of other people. Look at the definition. It's talking about understanding me.
Yeah.
And only when I understand my emotions and my relationships can I actually take that learning and start understanding others.
But in the situation you just described, as a result of that experience, you could then go to a project and understand who are the canaries in the coal mine that are worth listening to, and who are the ones who will always be naysayers, and therefore you don't want to discount them, but you also want to help them become a little more positive. So you're able to discern. I think discernment is one of those qualities that a lot of project managers need to be able to develop within themselves.
I couldn't say that even more. One of the it all goes back to being a proper human being and to be a fully functioning human being. It's that critical analysis. It's being able to pump the brakes before you jump over the cliff. It's the ability to actually think before you act and then collect the knowledge. So much of project management is fact-based, but the ability to gather facts and to make a proper decision is so much a behavioral consideration. These two concepts have to fit together.
Yeah.
And as a project manager, when we're talking about disruption, when we're talking about status quo versus innovation, when we're talking about the world is no longer the way it was last week and it's going to be different next week, we have to actually focus on both sides of this equation.
Well, and again, depending on how we came up in our careers, a lot of project managers like you and I have the advantage of having come up through the analysis part of our careers. And so therefore the analytical portion of what you just described is a little easier for us. We do have the skills to be able to analyze those situations so that we can understand human behavioral aspects in that situation.
Yeah, so here's a list of what PMI thinks a project manager needs. Now, they don't think. They do surveys.
Yeah.
They work with the Standish Group. They work with Gallup. They work with other industry analysts, right? They analyze and they say, this is what we have decided. So here's what they came up with. An innovative mindset, an attitude that, accepts and takes advantage of innovation, data science skills. We're not just talking about big data. It's the full use and comprehension of applying, analysis to diverse data, legal and regulatory knowledge for our compliance. And you were mentioning that earlier.
Yeah.
The ability to make data-driven decisions, not just putting out the information, but actually participate in the decision knowledge. How about security and privacy knowledge? How about collaborative leadership skills?
Oh, that last one is huge. Huge.
Yeah. How you can be as authoritative as you want on a project, and it's it's gonna move forward, but it's not going to move forward in the way you like it.
You know where I learned that last one, collaborative leadership skills, where I really understood it the best was when I was brought on as an independent contractor to an organization putting in an IT system as part of the PMO. And one of the instructions, and it was in my contract, I was not allowed to oversee or manage the organization's staff. And so as a result of that, I had to learn influence. And here's what happened after a while. After I kind of thought about this and learned it, after a while, I recognized the fact that they were paying more attention to my advice than their own manager's advice. But I had learned this skill to be collaborative in my leadership, such that I didn't have to be authoritative. I could be collaborative and influential.
We're hitting a gold mine of things that we need to talk about here.
Well, and the reason I brought that up is because you can read the words on paper and it makes sense. But if you actually try it and realize how hard it can be, then it makes more sense when you actually apply it.
Yes. It's the context. It's that diverse interconnectedness that you as a project manager have access to, that very few other people on the project can actually see.
Of that list you just stated from PMI, I guess it was, plus I'm sure you've got ideas about other ones as well. What do you think are the most important, most critical skills for PM to have, for project manager to have?
Oh, I'm with you. It's a toss-up for me in two major categories of human behavior. Number one, collaborative leadership.
Yeah.
Number two, thoughtful analysis, critical thinking. Okay.
Yeah.
With those together, we can build anything. With the collaborative leadership, I can pull the experts together and work with them. If I don't have that background or that knowledge with the analytical skills, I can actually look not just at the formulas, but the logic and the progression of the argument that's on the table, how the people are progressing through it. And I can map that out and say, oh, they're missing a piece. There's a big gray area that everybody's jumping over that we need to focus on before we can see the entire chain from the data to the decision. And these are the fundamental things we need to have a big handle on before we can conquer things like making decisions around data security and making decisions around these others. Now, that's just my opinion, but that opinion is based on, analysis, talking to other experts, and observing lots and lots of people in business and projects.
And probably having lived through some of those experiences. And here's the other thing that you talked about, people sort of skipping over the obvious, and you are facilitating, you are participating. Maybe you are the obvious expert in the group, but you don't have to say, by the way, you all missed this. You can always just say, hey, has anybody thought of this? How would this work?
Yeah, exactly.
And so that you let them make the aha moment, and you're just the inquisitive one. So there's ways to work with your organization and be influential as opposed to authoritative.
See, this is true leadership. This is true leadership when you actually guide people through the process of analysis and decision making without them even realizing they're being guided. I have seen 3, maybe 4 people in my life who are masters at this.
Yeah.
And it is an incredible skill to behold. They're sitting back in the room just smiling and they're not making any statements or comments. They're not providing their decisions. It's like you're saying, it's that gentle influence that says, have you looked at this? What about this? What about this?
I once worked for a project manager. I think I've told you this story before, but we would be in a meeting and the question would be on the table and it would obviously go to him. And it was a him in this case. And he would sit there and he would mull this over in his mind for probably 5 or 10 seconds. Well, in a meeting of 15 people, 5 or 10 seconds is like 3 hours. Mm-hmm. And I'm sitting there as his deputy going, come on, answer the question. Come on, answer. But then when it would come out, would be very thoughtful. Now, he knew the answer all along, but he wanted to come out as being something that he really contemplated, he really understood. And then when he would present it, it wasn't presented in this is it, period. It was presented in a way of like kind of like, well, what do you guys think? And
this is a powerful skill.
Yeah.
This is a piece of active listening, and I would implore everybody to think about this and think about how they can use this. Western civilization, primarily, but all humanity is this way. We don't like silence.
Right.
And right. It's wonderful if you can create 5 to 15 seconds of silence. Sometimes, number one, people are going to give information out that they hadn't thought of.
That's true.
Number two, people are going to give themselves time to think through things. You're giving them permission to go inside their heads and put 2 and 2 together. Yeah. And finally, you're respecting other people by not stepping over their comments and questions.
Oh, huge. How many times do people think they know what the other person's going to say and therefore interrupt and answer?
I already know what you're thinking.
Yeah. So
You're a
let me
foregone
answer it.
conclusion. Yeah.
Yeah. Let me stop you right there and let me give you my wise answer.
Yeah.
Here's what I'm curious about though. In that long list, and even in the discussion we just had, I'm surprised that PMI, using that list, didn't come up with emotional intelligence as one of the leadership skills that we should be thinking about.
I agree with you. I agree with you. I think they lump it under collaborative leadership. I haven't read into the details of that part of the report. That report, Pulse of the Profession, is easily 90 pages.
Oh wow.
So I'd like to see. I'm going to go back and see if they did talk about that. But you're right, emotional intelligence and actually understanding that, and especially when an organization or when a group is going through great disruption, that is where your emotional intelligence can help you the most. Like I said, pumping the brakes, giving people a little circle of safety where they can relax and think carefully.
Well, and especially in this day and age where there seems to be more sensitivity around people's roles, around people's contributions and stuff. So yeah, it becomes even more important to be able to understand how I react emotionally to what's happening around me. So,
there's one more question I have for you, and we may not be able to fully talk about this yet. And we're going to have to confer after this show whether we want to extend this discussion a little further. So you have things going on that are going to impact the business, and they're going to impact the project, and they're going to impact your work, right? And they're going to impact you personally. Well, here's something to think about. Business, at the same time we're trying to figure out our project, business is responding to these external events as well. Now, have you ever had a time where business's response got in the way of the project?
oh, I think I can't think of an example personally right now. I'm sure there are. I'm sure there have been, because I have actually left corporations based on decision making that didn't suit. I don't know if that was right or wrong, but didn't suit me, right? So I'm sure there are those situations. But here's what's interesting. By happenstance this week, I picked up an article on Sears. Now, I don't know what, I grew up in Canada, but we had the Sears Roebuck catalog. And so for our international audience, Sears was a huge department store across the US and Canada. And they would send out catalogs, but the one as kids that we would grab would be the Christmas catalog, the wish book.
Oh yeah. And
then we would circle the things we wanted and put it out where our parents could see it because we wanted those presents, right? Anyway, I'm belaboring this, but here's what's interesting. The Sears Roebuck catalog, which had made Sears for 100 years, was discontinued 1 year before Amazon was formed. Now think about that. They had everything they needed to create their own Amazon, except that creative, innovative mindset somewhere missed the point. And along came Jeff Bezos selling books online, and we know the rest of that story. So yeah, there are business influences and decisions that make huge changes for the future.
Yeah. I can name a couple too. One of my favorite stories is when I was in consulting. There were like 350 of us, and the organization decided to create their own PMO, but they did it at the executive level, and they had an executive PMO, and they said this PMO is going to handle all the finance, all the contracting, and everything. And we said, great. And they had all the strategy in place, and they were ready for it, and the PMO was open, but the PMO was never in a position to actually help influence the individual project managers or the projects themselves. And this was a wonderful lunch discussion topic we had almost on a daily basis. But at the same time, it actually created a bunch of disruption for us because we had double the reporting that was necessary. And let me say, PMOs are wonderful if they're implemented in a proper way. It's just like everything else in business. You have to have a collaborative implementation. And what we had was an administrative office that was managing the projects for us. And it took us years to actually start that conversation, not just make a decision to help the PMO be better, but actually start that conversation. And I've seen this time and time again. We don't need to belabor this topic, but there are responses that organizations and companies have to changes in culture and changes in economics and society that actually influence us. And we need to actually be able to be advisors and participants, sometimes even outside of the project, and be able to protect our projects when we don't have that voice.
Perfect. That's exactly right. I think if we do a little head scratching, we might be able to take this into an entire episode.
That would be beautiful. Let's consider talking about that, because I think we still have some flight time on the airplane that we're going on right now.
Yeah, because up until now we've talked about how these decisions have affected us as project managers and how we can influence the corporations we work with and our teams as a result of that. But we need to go to the next step and see how those businesses themselves are being influenced. So yeah, I'm kind of liking that.
Very good. Very good. So I think if you all are interested in this topic as well, we'll be back here to talk about it. We'll continue this conversation. Until then, where can we find you, Merv, if we want to ask you a question or connect with you?
Oh, the best place to connect is through LinkedIn, because not only do we have that conversation, but other people can provide their input as well. And we end up with a better result for that question or that discussion. So LinkedIn, Merv Jersak.
And me as well. I'm Tim or Timothy Jerome out on LinkedIn.
Absolutely. So until next week.
Yes, let's have a great weekend and see you again next.
See you.